Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's wonderful to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the panel called SIS Global to Local, Girls Education. And I am Naomi Moland. I'll be the moderator for this morning's panel. And I'm on the faculty at the School of International Service at American University. I teach in the Intercultural and International Communication program about issues related to multiculturalism, race and diversity around the world, girls' education and transnational education more broadly, and also about global media. So I'm really looking forward to our panel today. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some phenomenal panelists who I really know that will benefit greatly from hearing their insights about this important topic. I'd also like to thank the School of International Service here at American University and also the School of Education's International Training and Education Program, the ITEP program, for co-sponsoring today's event. And of course, I also want to flag the fact that today is International Women's Day. So it's such a wonderful day to be able to have this event and think about these important issues. So the discussion will last about 45 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please submit it through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Closed captioning is available for those who need it. Please click on the option at the bottom of your screens. We'd also like to ask that no one record this session. We will be recording the webinar and it will be available on the SIS YouTube channel for later viewing. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists for today. So first of all, Croshelle Harris-Hussein is the Education Office Director for USAID in Mali, where her focus is providing access to quality, equitable education opportunities to children and youth in conflict and crisis environments. So welcome, Croshelle. We're so lucky to have you here today. Melissa Kilby is the Executive Director of Girl Up, an initiative founded by the United Nations Foundation in 2010 to help support UN agencies that focus on adolescent girls. Thank you. Welcome, Melissa. Angela Patton is the CEO of Girls for a Change, GFAC, a US nonprofit with the mission of empowering young women by inviting them to design, lead, fund, and implement social change projects that tackle issues girls face in their own neighborhoods. So welcome, Angela. And finally, Karen Venable Croft is the co-founder and executive director of Girls Global Academy, an all-girls charter school in Washington, D.C., with the mission to teach girls to become leaders influencing change for global benefit. So once again, this is one of the purposes of this event is to be able to look at this issue all the way from, a global scale. We have Croshelle joining us from Mali and Melissa, who thinks about these issues with the United Nations on a global scale. And then Angela more focused in the United States and Karen right here in DC. So it's such a great opportunity to think about these issues from the global to the local. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with our questions. So I'd like to start with a grounding question for all the panelists, and we'll sort of just take you one by one here. What do you think is the biggest educational challenge for the girls with whom you work? And this doesn't need to be related to COVID, but of course it can be. It's impossible for us to talk about education in general or girls' education in particular without acknowledging the ways that COVID is presenting unprecedented upheavals to all levels of education right now. I just saw a UNICEF report come out recently that says that more than 168 million children around the world have been out of school. Their schools have been closed for almost a year. That's about 1 in 7 children around the world who have not had access to education for this past year. So obviously this is presenting enormous challenges to this issue. One of the things I love about our panel, once again, is that we have this wide range from experts, working in a school right here in DC to experts designing strategies for girls' education across multiple countries. So I realize your answers will also vary in scale from the local to the global, which I think provides us a wonderful opportunity to talk about these issues on micro and macro levels. I realize it might be hard for you to pick just one challenge, but I would ask you to do so. So let's go ahead and start with Karen. Could you tell us, what do you think is one of the main challenges facing the girls that you work with right now?
So I think I'm just going to go ahead and tie it back to our mission. So our mission is fostering pathways to lead and learn. And so we think that we're just on this journey of creating more pathways of equity and inclusion. And our program really engenders empowerment, and it ignites like our students' confidence to equip them with like mindsets and behaviors and skills that allow them to flourish in any arena. And so when we see our school, we see it as a place that our students can actually develop their voices and speak on topics that are important to them. They can understand that their voice is a tool for change, and it actually can be a catalyst for the actions. And so I think that this is important because it will remove barriers to education and access that have persisted for many, many years. And so we think that disrupting how we are conditioned to see the world and how the world sees us is a very important piece. And so our students need to understand the why of the work, making connections to something that is relevant. And the educational challenge is just something that we gladly take on, because we know that through mindsets and behavior and skill development, we can actually address the issues like stereotype, threat, and bias. So confidence for our students to be risk takers, confidence for them to explore and take advantage of opportunities, confidence to speak on issues that matter, confidence to ask for help and accept help, confidence in facing a fear, confidence to see mistakes as learning opportunities, just confidence that perfection is not necessary, and that confidence to know that they belong at the table. So I think if we educate a girl in this way, we can change the trajectory of her life and put her in the driver's seat, actually. When we intentionally work on confidence and agency, she'll become an influencer that understands the value and rights of education.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. Now, how about you, Angela? Can you tell us a little bit more about the girls that you work with and some of the challenges and opportunities they face?
Yes, good morning. Angela Patton, and I'm not far from DC in Richmond, Virginia. So for us this year, it has been quite a challenge, mainly because the issues that girls, specifically Black girls that I work with, were facing prior to COVID have just been heightened, especially when we are talking about their mental health. And so we have seen, unfortunately, suicide rates, attempts and also feelings go up within our community and our schools. And it's very interesting to us because these were girls who dreamed about what school could possibly be for them one day, because of dealing with a high percentage in the Richmond Tri-City areas of push out. Our girls were pushed out because they were stereotyped and dealing with microaggression and bias, or as I just plainly say, blankly racism really in their face. And then when the uprising started within our communities, we have some girls who actually attended a school that's directly across the street from the monument. And not only was COVID issue, it was a safety issue at this point, if these girls could return back into their schools and not having to deal with something else, one more thing. So one of the things that we take pride in Girls for Change is that we know we can't do it all. So partnerships are extremely important to us. And we made sure that we reached out specifically to Black social workers and community leaders who actually were experts in these types of situations where our girls were just, tapped out at this point. They were sick of virtual. They didn't feel like their voices were being heard. They were also dealing with fear. So we reminded the girls, of course, and redirected them about what Girls for Change was all about is elevating girls' voices. So what is it that you see? What is it that you want to say? And how do you want us to make sure we make change according to your specific needs? And that really helped our girls just remind them that even though we're virtual and we can figure out ways to be together, you are still seen, heard, and celebrated. And then making sure that we gave them resources that were not really in our center, but they were in our community. In spite of everything that they were feeling or that they heard or that they, thought, they really did have people in the Richmond community who cared about them. And I would say that all of the girls who did reach out, including their parents who were suffering with some mental health, are getting better. And fortunately, some girls did return to school, because some of our schools have opened, and the girls were able to create projects. They were able to figure out how to be creative with a TikTok about what they were feeling. And we made it fun and we made it engaging. And we figured out creative ways to keep our girls safe and together. And I'm happy to say that they have been grateful for those attempts to really save their life. That's what it was about. It was about our girls first, and then hopefully everyone else would get on board and understand that they are instrumental and we have to take care of them and we must protect them. And so that's what Girls for Change has been able to do to support our girls during these trying times.
Thank you so much, Angela. And I wanted to just flag a couple of things that you said. First of all, just it's such an important recognition that I'm sure will come up for all of us that girls are around the world are now facing sort of what some people have called the triple crisis of the pandemic and major economic downturn, which affects certain populations disproportionately, along with continuing issues of racial injustice and uprising and things that can be very challenging, particularly for students of color and girls of color to be navigating that way. So I appreciate you bringing up some of those issues that are, and I also just at the end there, I was just sort of got goosebumps when you said you're saving their lives. And I think this is such a profound comment for us to talk about. There's so much pressure put on education, that education can do so much for girls. And we know that it's not just about them learning academic issues, but in this case, it's really giving them a lifeline, period, to kinds of mental health access and all those important things. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to Melissa. Can you tell us a little bit, Melissa, about what you do and some of the girls that you've been working with?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I just wanted to say how much what Karen and Angela shared resonated, and how, the hyper-local or the, sort of more national. Angela, I'm just up the road in Virginia in the suburbs of DC, but what we're actually seeing globally is not so different than what we're seeing in sort of these sort of like pockets, right, of what this last year has been. And one of the things that really jumped out to me that Angela shared, that I would say, Naomi, is like the fourth element of this, what was a trifecta, is the mental health crisis that I believe is disproportionately affecting girls globally. And I think here in the US, we actually have started to talk about this more openly, but there are places around the world where this is not actually a conversation and it's not acknowledged. And so it's very interesting. That wasn't actually going to be the first thing that I shared, but when it came up, it is very much a universal impact of this last year. And I think, when I think about girls' education globally, two of the things that jump out to me and always have been access and valuation. The barriers that girls face vary greatly, right, around the world, depending on each community and each country, and sort of what is the sort of barrier to overcome to just be at school. And obviously that varies within communities, it varies within identities, it varies within, cultural backgrounds. But the value of girls' education also varies significantly. And I think that both of those issues have been exacerbated in this last year. I think, we were doing pretty good globally on primary school enrollment, and that benefited girls. When we got those enrollment rates up as a world with the Millennium Development Goals, we were really seeing a lot of girls in primary school. The big focus of the Sustainable Development Goals has been to sort of make that leap to secondary school, to finish that degree, to be able to get those tertiary skills and actually have the education to then go be able to make an income. And we were seeing some progress. We had a long way to go, but we were seeing some progress. I think the most alarming part of the statistic that you shared of the 168 million students that haven't been to school in a year is how many of those students will never return, because crossing that barrier once was, sort of the sort of goal and challenge of a lifetime, but to then do it again, it's just less likely. And so, those steps back that we've taken from even getting girls into school. So I think access has been interesting. The other part of access is digital access. Part of the reason that those children have been out of school is because they couldn't do school on Zoom. They didn't have data and computers and cell phones and technology. And you see that globally across the world. I would imagine Karen and Angela can speak to how that has been a challenge, in DC or, around the country here in the US, a developed country with all the sort of prosperity. Imagine, being in another part of the world where that's not even on the table. So access becomes a whole different conversation when you can't physically be in the classroom, and the only way to learn is via a resource you don't have access to. And I think we have been fighting this fight around the value of girls' education and why educate girls, especially in more developing countries. And we've made a really good case and we've seen good strides, but I think that when it comes down to a global pandemic and you're back in a position of deciding who goes to school, who takes care of the younger siblings, who goes to work, who can do an activity that can generate income, we're right back where we started, and the boys are going to be the ones that get to go back to school. So, these are two huge barriers to education and have been. And my biggest fear, and I think what we are seeing, is that we're going backwards, and it's just going to be twice as hard of a fight to get those girls back in school. And then when you layer in the mental health crisis of the girls themselves and what pressure this is putting on girls all around the world from all backgrounds and all incomes, it is a really challenging situation.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa, for those insights. And Croshelle, this is one of the amazing benefits of the Zoom time, is that we have a correspondent here from Mali to kind of explain what things are like in West Africa right now in Mali. Can you tell us a little bit about some of what you've been working on and what you've been seeing?
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Moland, and thank you to American University for giving me the opportunity. Let me first say that I'm not speaking on behalf of USAID, but I just want to say that what I'll talk about comes from my experience of working with USAID. And I kind of like going after Melissa because she set kind of a picture, and I'll use Mali and a couple other countries I've been in as examples to kind of fine tune what she talked about. So really, I would say the biggest challenge is poverty, because poverty both at the nation state level and at the family level really impacts anyone in the family who goes to school, whether it's a boy or a girl. And it does that in three ways. So access to education, the quality of education that's offered, and governance. So when poverty is the underlying challenge, then all children will suffer in gaining access to schools, because it's just a question of, are there even enough classrooms available, or schools available, or teachers available? So, in a country like Nigeria, where I've also worked, and you have a population of almost 200 million people, and, a quarter of the population, or nearly half of the population, are young people, and children under the age of, 25 or under the age of 18 even, they're just not enough, there's not enough access available for them. Where you do have classrooms available, then the quality of education suffers, because your teachers may not be well trained, adequately trained. Some of your teachers have not even finished high school. You don't have enough learning materials or books, or the content in those materials is not relevant to what children need to be learning right now, and what not just primary school children, but even university level students are not getting an education that prepares them for the current workforce. And then governance. In a country like Mali that is fighting internal threats to security, whether it's, transnational and jihadism, or it's intracommunity conflicts over and lack of resources sort of spread already on like how to security sector. So teachers go unpaid, schools go on classrooms, schools divided. So that is kind of, state level. Comments was saying there are hard choices about who goes to school, because as much as, sustainable development goals talk about education being free, it's not. There are all kinds of embedded school fees that have to go with education. And a family of, with 6 children, if there's one boy, well, certainly he may get an education, but none of the girls might be educated. Or a family has to make really difficult choices about which maybe one girl would be sent off for schooling. Families also have to ask themselves, is it a better benefit to us that the girl goes out to work to make supplemental income for the family instead of being a cost to the family? Who, as Melissa rightly said, who's going to do chores at home, who's going to look after younger siblings, all of these, especially in families where the mother has to work, then sometimes the girls, especially the older girls, will need to stay behind at home to do chores and look after siblings. And as a girl gets older, even if she finishes, let's say, the 6th grade, as soon as she gets old enough to marry, then it's a question of, is the dowry that would come in marrying her off of a bigger benefit to that poor family than keeping her at home? Because of course, keeping her at home means that she's another person to take care of. So I'll give more, as we go through some of the other discussion, and talk a little bit more about how the US government is trying to help address some of these issues. But really the biggest challenge that, even without COVID, the biggest challenge for girls globally, especially in developing countries, comes down to lack of resources and poverty. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Croshelle. And it was so helpful for you to kind of give that overarching theme, but also a couple of actual, precise examples of how this might play out in different families, because I think that's important for us to recognize that way. So heading back to the US here a little bit, and although I think this is an issue that I'm sure is around the world as well, I wanted to ask Karen, kind of zooming in a little bit on girls' identities and how they affect schools and how schools affect girls' identities. So the word intersectionality has become more mainstream recently as a way to analyze the way that our identities combine and interact to produce overlapping systems of privilege and disadvantage. In one of the videos about your school's website that I watched, you discuss how girls navigate both their racial and their gender identities, and obviously other kinds of identities as well. How do you think that race and gender and other identities intersect for your students in ways that bring educational challenges and maybe also educational opportunities?
That's actually a pretty good question. I think that there are advantages for our students to be able to actually examine what intersectionality actually is at this time, at 14 years old, because it really gives rise to inquiry and agency. It allows them to go into depth and ask additional questions about really what does it mean. And the concept is not about being a victim. It's actually about understanding the experience experiences and the relationship it has with privilege, oppression, prejudices, and discrimination. And so when we create open opportunities for dialogue about identity and the impact that it actually has on our students and how they're treated and viewed, it just creates an open atmosphere for them to put into perspective what they know is happening, and it just gives an open dialogue. I think it's about being mindful of the impact that habits of harm have affected generations. And here in the United States, we know that it's been generational habits of harm, and that power and advantage is maintained by perpetuating what's always been. And so Ruth King, I believe, said that we need to actually understand what those habits of harm actually are in order to interrupt our mental programming around this issue. And so intersectionality, really all it does is, not all that it does, but it opens the doors for opportunity for what our students can choose to actually advocate for. So when they are being inquisitive or curious about how their identity intersects with something that happens to them out in the world, they're actually able to understand what racial and power dynamics are, at least the introduction to race and power dynamics, because that's a pretty heavy topic. And then our staff can just start to incorporate what projects that they're going to incorporate in their classes to further develop that, to understand how their race and how their gender and other pieces of their identity actually come into play. Because we all know for hundreds of years, this country, people have just been seeking social justice, civic and human rights. And it's just a really good place for our students to be able to investigate what that's like, even at 14 and 15 years old, because then what they can do is to become a part of understanding what social justice is and how they can start to enact change around that.
Thanks so much. And I love kind of this, like, again, we're looking at all these different axes and different levels here. And I think it's so important to think about these curricular aspects. Like those are curricular examples that you're giving, you know, and I think that Melissa and Croshelle just gave such great examples of kind of the broader governance issues as well. But I know Croshelle was also saying, of course, it also matters once we get girls into schools, what they're being taught there and what kinds of values they're learning. And are we, you know, trying to challenge the sort of traditional, you know, male-dominated curriculum in many ways, and how can that help girls in all kinds of ways? So Angela, I would ask you kind of a related question that way. I think when I first read your bio, I love the phrase that said that you're committed to preparing Black girls for the world and the world for Black girls. I think a lot of times education focuses on preparing students to fit into the current society, and some scholars critique this and analyze how schools often reflect white, middle-class, male values, and some educational efforts are aimed at helping minority children to succeed in a white, middle-class, male world. But by saying that you want to prepare the world for Black girls, you seem to be suggesting that the world needs to change so that it can see the different strengths and of different kinds of children. So can you tell me a little bit more about how can we prepare the world for Black girls?
Yes. Well, I want to tell you first where that phrase comes from, too. It comes from my own experience as a Black girl. So when in the 80s, when a lot of Black families wanted to move to the suburbs for a white experience, because my family was the family who lived in, you know, the city when they considered it the slums and the projects or the ghetto. And so, of course, a Black family who gets what they call the good job, right? You move to the suburbs where it's a better school, a better opportunity, you know, it's better people. I'm gonna keep you safe. So my parents were doing what they felt was the best for me because they did not have these same opportunities, because they did attend segregated schools. They did get the hand-me-down books. They had what we talked about earlier, no resources, right? Lack of access and opportunities. And so in the 80s, they were told that this is how you get a piece of the pie. So my parents moved to the suburbs, and I was the only Black girl in many of my classes. I experienced extreme racism and sexism, but I was the girl who actually had what my mama called running your mouth too much, right? So I was, constantly in detention and constantly put out of school because I was using my voice when I was faced with this racism. And so I realized when I started to work in girl spaces that this wasn't changing at all, that our girls were still told to act like a lady. They were told what they needed to do to fit in, which I considered polishing Black girls, right? And so I remembered being that Black girl that had to be polished when I could clearly see something that did not feel right, that was not fair, that made me feel like going home and just crawling under the bed. And I had parents that were supportive, loved my parents, but they were doing what they thought was the right thing. So in my preparing Black girls for the world is really just making sure that girls are equipped and capable to enter into spaces to like have a good job, start a business, increase their digital skills, getting them ready for what it looks like to be prepared for the 21st century. Absolutely, we want that. But does she have to change her hair? Does she have to wear this particular outfit that makes you comfortable? Absolutely not. So in one of our programs, Girl Ambassador, we are making sure that our girls are capable and equipped so that you would not find one more excuse to push her out and not give her an opportunity. But we also encourage our hiring partners, our volunteers, our staff, and our funders to learn what our girls are experiencing, to really think about what it is for you when you say, I'm going to the next diversity and inclusion workshop or training or panel or summit. Are you really changing your lifestyle? Are you changing your mindset about when you see a young Black girl walk into that room? What do you think about her, right? And I had one similar incident last week when someone asked me, how do your girls feel about the poet that was at the inauguration? Don't they want to be like her? I said, absolutely not. They want to be like themselves. They want to be the Black girl that she has the potential to become. And that's really helping someone change their mindset about when you see a Black girl, she was polished, she was poised, she was ready. But there's so many other girls like that too, that don't maybe have an opportunity to speak at the inauguration or an opportunity to have on that outfit that you thought was so precious. So I want to try to make sure that when I prepare you for Black girls, that you see us all in our beautiful, authentic selves, no matter where we live, no matter who our mama is and what opportunity that we had. So that's where that comes from. And I share that a lot to open minds and open doors for our girls. And it seems to help people really take a deeper look at themselves. And that is not just for white America, that's for everybody across the globe, including myself, to remind me that this girl is bringing her best self, and I need to be open to that for my learning and for my growth and for my development. And what can we do together in partnership to make sure that this young woman is prepared for the world?
Great, thank you so much. And I think, like, Melissa, I'll kind of turn this over to you. And I want to kind of build off something that Angela was talking about with, of course, with sort of, building communities around girls that are ready for them and that can support them. And I know both your and Angela's organizations work a lot on like out of school learning, like community building projects with girls and more, I don't know if the correct term is non-formal education or informal education, but, outside of the traditional K-12 structure, whatnot. So what do you see as what do you see as the strengths of that kind of broader approach to education, particularly for girls? And maybe particularly now that millions of schools around the world are shuttered, does this kind of outside of school learning and non-formal education have an even more important role to play?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And Angela, thank you so much for sharing your personal story too. I think it obviously causes individual reflection. I was always running my mouth too, but I bet we had very different reactions to the runnings of our mouths. And so I really appreciate that personal story. And I think what's one of the things that comes through for me when we talk about this programming outside of the classroom or extracurricular, peripheral, is that girls are not fundamentally given the opportunity to lead in the classroom, and they're not necessarily fundamentally valued in the classroom. And so if we want girls to be able to go out into their communities and lead, to go on to their professions and their careers and be in positions of decision-making power, and I'm talking about actually like positions of power, then they need that opportunity to flex those skills, to learn those skills, to practice, to build their confidence and to create that identity outside of the classroom. I almost want Karen to answer this question too, but I know that, girls' schools are one of the places where they can do this in the classroom. And that's why there's such an interesting opportunity there. But I think what I see with Girl Up and certainly globally is that just giving young women an opportunity to lean into this idea, this inkling, maybe this spark that they could, I think is the most important thing. The community projects, the getting people to follow you, the influencing your peers, influencing the adults in your life, that comes through this action that you can take, this social impact that so many young people today, and very much so many girls around the world, are so inclined. That is the perfect stage to start to envision yourself as someone who can have power and be in power in the future. And I also think that when a community, a global community of girls has the opportunity to learn from each other, to see each other's individual experiences, to hear these personal stories across identity, across geography, across poverty levels and income levels, we actually open ourselves up to being more empathetic leaders when we down the road get to lead. So I think it's crucial, because I think there's just, when you're just doing everything you can to get a textbook, you're not getting the skills to build your identity and confidence, to know that you can go on and run for office, or, be a storyteller, or pursue STEM, or even going to learn tertiary or vocationary school skills, where you can actually change the course of your trajectory. If you don't have the identity, the confidence, or the opportunity to flex that, it's really hard to envision it. So I think, for me, that's something that I see globally, and I see, again, from the upper echelons of private school and co-ed learning to, girls around the world. You still aren't really seeing that opportunity to fully be yourself as a girl, and then when you add in the other identities such as race or sexual identity, ability, that becomes even more challenging. So organizations like Girl Up, like Girls for a Change, like girls' schools in general, really are giving girls like the space they need to flex that.
Such an important type of organization to dovetail with K-12, or with more typical public or private, like formal schooling that way. So it's very important that way. Croshelle, I want to zoom out a little bit further again and ask, it's already very clear that there will be dramatic inequalities in vaccine distribution around the world. And therefore, which countries get back to normal, whatever normal might look like in different countries, and also reopen schools, of course. How do you see these inequalities affecting long-term outcomes for girls in terms of when schools will be able to open? And could there be countries where girls are out of school for multiple years? And what are the implications of this?
Mm-hmm. Let me paint a little bit of a background first, because I think for the audience that's participating and even the other panelists, you know, the United States has the largest rate of COVID infections in the world, right? And the way that we're handling the distribution of vaccines is quite different to address such a large number. Mali is only had or only recorded 8,580 cases. And so the number of deaths is something like just double digits. And I mean, we temper that a little bit to say we're not sure that everybody that needs to be tested is tested, but it's, you know, almost 60% of the population is very, very young. So we also could have lots of people that were walking around asymptomatic and just recovered, and we wouldn't know. We just haven't seen a lot of deaths. But schools were closed, and schools didn't reopen until January 25th. But schools were closed in a lot of the country prior to that because teachers were on strike or because of conflict. So children in Mali have been out of school for one reason or another for a long time, even pre-COVID. But what COVID did was it went from, let's say, a large percentage of schools being closed to all schools being closed. So children are definitely behind. The school year didn't start in September. Like I said, it didn't start until January. The Ministry of Education has decided that that year will be sort of a truncated, you know, year that's compressed from January through, I think now it might be August. So, you know, children are gonna fall drastically behind, and we're not really sure what catch up is gonna look like. Because how are even teachers and classrooms and the curriculum and all those things going to be sort of reconfigured to meet the needs? There are lots of sort of leaving school exams, you know, pass exams. You go from one grade to the next, or you go from upper primary school into the upper level, what we would call high school. And even exam period last fall was really marred by, you know, delays, and then people not being able to get to testing centers, or how do you do social distancing in space like that? So Mali's been really, really challenged with that. Now, aside from that, what does that mean for girls and families and things like that? I mean, we know globally that all the things I said before that impact the family's decisions about whether to send their girl to school or not. Well, then if a girl's at home of no choice of her own, she's home because there is no school. We've seen domestic violence cases go up. I think that happened in the States as well. But also here, girls were sent to work. You know, livelihoods became much more jeopardized. And so if a girl could go out and make money to supplement the family income, she's going to do that. And girls were married off as well. Those two things primarily may mean girls never go back to school. So there's just no question of her catching up. She's not going to go. And what we'll see over time is that then that creates a drain on the economic productivity of society as a whole. I'll quickly talk about one of the USAID programs we have going on here, because it touches on what Melissa was talking about. So we have an activity that focuses on girls aged like 10 to 15, primarily those who've dropped out of school, to bring them back to school. But doing that takes a whole entire community approach, which someone else touched on as well. So you have to convince families that the value of her education is greater than her being at home taking care of siblings or doing chores or getting married or working. We convince the family, but we also do that through women leaders, older women in the community who are seen as role models or leaders. So I also want us to be a little bit careful about our, and I don't want to get on my soapbox, but our sort of Western definition of what leadership and empowerment looks like, because sometimes in West Africa, it looks very different than what we're used to. So even within that, we are taking care to help families and communities understand how much better a girl could be if she's educated, how it improves the well-being of her, her family, her future family, and the society as a whole. But I don't want us to downplay the way those communities see a strong woman or see a girl's role, because sometimes I think that gets us a little bit in trouble. We walk in as the big knowledgeable American saying your girl should be doing this, that, and the other, and we have to mold that to what's appropriate for the community. But it's a balance of changing behavioral norms and how societies see and contribute to the raising of girls. So I'll kind of leave it there for a minute. But yeah, will we be able to use those same tools in the community and convince them after schools are fully reopened and re-engaged to take girls back to the classroom? That's what we're going to have to try to figure out how to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Croshelle. And the last point you made about leadership being defined and success being defined differently in different communities, I think is so important as well. And I think it's also one of the critiques about some of the ways that we justify girls' education is sometimes when it is justified for economic means, right? When we say girls need to be educated so that they can contribute to the economy. And I think you just made that really important point of saying that girls need to be educated because they need to be educated for their own well-being, for the well-being of their societies. And of course, economic growth for them and their families is part of their well-being. But I think that's an important thing that you pointed out. There's those sort of differing definitions of what leadership and well-being looks like in different societies that way. So we're doing great on time. We have until 12:15, and I'm really looking forward to turning to your questions. But before I turn to the questions from the audience here, I just want to do one more go around with the panelists, and I'll ask you to be brief. And I know this might be a tough question to be brief on, but in all kinds of sectors and locales around the world, people have been asking if the pandemic might give us opportunities to sort of build back better. And like Croshelle just mentioned, of course, the pandemic is affecting different places around the world very differently, including that there's been much lower levels of death and disease in some countries. But is it possible that this global shutdown of schools has provided us with opportunities to stop and reflect and to rebuild schools and education systems that are more egalitarian and just for girls and for all students? Could we find ways for more girls to reach higher levels of education? Could we rewrite the curriculum to be less ethnocentric and less patriarchal? In your setting, can you think of one change? I'll give you just one change that could be made as the world emerges from the pandemic that could provide greater educational opportunities and outcomes for girls. Let's just switch it up a little bit to keep you on your toes. Let's start with Melissa.
I had a feeling you were coming to me. I don't know why. So I would love to take this up to like the 30,000 foot level as I think about this. You know, we really got to talk a little bit about, I got to share a little bit about like why leadership is important and why having that sort of outside of the K through 12. And for me, it's about who's in power and who's making the decisions. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting over the last year is to see how women leaders have handled the global pandemic differently. And we have a really interesting opportunity here because it was a global pandemic and there were different styles of leadership in every corner of the world. And I think that one could argue that in places where women were in charge, making the highest level of decisions and doing that from a place of empathy and of caretaking, countries, you know, did far better. And so I hope that this pandemic has offered another argument towards why women need to be in leadership positions, and why we need women in the conversations, at the tables, in the room, you know, where policies are being determined, because they do bring something interesting that we have been missing. And we've actually now seen it play out. We have like a real life case study for why this kind of leadership is important in every conversation. So that's, again, like 30,000 foot. I hope that we've proven at some level to some people around the world who maybe needed to be convinced otherwise, that there is a place for specifically feminine leadership. And Croshelle, I loved your call out on sort of the Western definition of leadership, but I think we've probably seen that more than anywhere in the village, in the community, in sort of how women lead. And when we let women have a say, like everybody benefits, and we have that at a global level. So that would be one of the things that I hope has changed due to the pandemic.
Much, Melissa. How about Croshelle? We'll go next to you.
Thank you, because I like following Melissa. It's like she sort of sets me up and then I'll try to hit the home run. So really, I think I'll come to it a little bit differently than she did though. So when I think about what's a tool or a way to sort of, revamp curriculum, or what did we discover that could be really useful? In the development world, we came back to distance learning, but distance learning in the way we used to do it, which was through radio instruction. Because computers, internet, all that mumbo jumbo, 5G, whatever, it's not happening here. It's not going to work. And even, I was listening to something, I think on a PBS Frontlines edition or something like that, that talked about how even in the United States, there are many, many children that don't have access to broadband. And so they're either trying to use a phone connection or, something that's constraining their ability to learn. And so if you try to take that model that's not even perfect in the United States and put it here in the developing world, it's not happening. But, under the new administration that we have as well, President Biden right now, one of his big talking points is build back better. So if we at USAID were to take that and say, okay, well, we were using radio instruction 15 years ago. We don't want to use the exact same model. So how do we build it back better? How do we make sure that there's supplementary material to go along with radio instruction? That maybe if you're using radio instruction in the classroom, the teachers are better equipped with using those instructions that come on every day at 10 a.m. or whenever they are, to better utilize that to make it work in schools. But also one of the things historically we saw as a benefit to radio instruction was the audience was bigger than just the child. If you played radio instruction learning programs in the middle of the afternoon or late afternoon, the whole family would listen. So you might have mothers sitting around cooking and the radio is on, and so they're getting instruction in addition to the other children, the other siblings at home. You might have mothers who are actually young mothers who dropped out of school in their teenage years, and they want, one thing that is for sure, girls want to go to school. It's everyone around them that has to sort of be maneuvered and convinced to keep them in school. But, a very young woman will get married. She'll have a child. She wants to continue her education. And in some societies, she can't come back to school with an infant. But if she can continue her education with radio instruction, that's really a big asset to rural communities and girls all around. So I would say that's one of the things that we've really come back to, and we're having conversations as USAID and as the US government with our host partner governments to say, remember that thing we did with you about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, can we bring that back and figure out a way to expand that and make it useful for everybody? And in that way, you maybe don't have to have a 100% return to classroom-based learning, but you still, you can kind of recoup some of the losses.
Right. Lots of different definitions of what distance learning can mean, and that kind of creativity might be something that's sparked by this situation. Good. Angela, how about you? What do you think? How could we build back better?
Yes, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's something I'm definitely going to share with my girls as they are tackling issues in the community to see if they can support that. So I actually thought about, it's a little bit of the same, but one thing that we know that is working is in Virginia, we make sure that when our girls create social change projects, that they are not just ideas, that our girls have an opportunity to take action. And so one thing that I am really proud of, and I want to make sure it continues, is that our girls' voices, as Melissa said earlier, around making sure women are in leadership roles, we make sure that our girls have a seat and a voice at the table. So currently we have girls serving on an education committee around making sure that we incorporate African studies within the schools, because that is not a requirement in Virginia. And we also have a few girls sitting on a committee around dress code, really working with the Virginia Education School Board members to make sure that they read and understand the policy, and the girls are giving feedback on the language and making sure that they share their experiences. So a lot of times you can have, an example, but it may not be something that a girl ever experienced. And they say, well, this is why I was probably, suspended from wearing my African headdress and just expressing my culture and my heritage. And really what some of the girls are able to do is really help these power and leaders and, really understand their true experiences, because they're hearing it from the girls. And then outside of just our school education, even our museums, we have an amazing partnership with the museum here, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, who invited our girls to help with an exhibit called The Dirty Down South. And they like, girls, we want to know, what is your Southern experience? What is the music you listen to and the food you ate? And what should the exhibit look like to get young people excited about coming to see the exhibit when it unveils in May 2? So I would sum it up as include the girls, not only just say, this is what we think is important for you, but in all forms of education, making sure that they are a part of what we want to see our world become. And if we want to say that, girls' voices matter, it's more than a hashtag, it's more than a logo, it's more than another girl organization popping up and trying to figure it out. Is really being an example within your community. Even if you're not in the girl space, you can think about a creative way to make sure girls' voices are elevated. And I really believe that these three that I just mentioned are doing that work.
Thank you. And Karen, we'll let you close up with this dreaming big question.
I happen to agree, and I was just jotting down when you asked the question, well, how I would respond. And I think it's threefold in that. And I said it when I was tying it back to our mission earlier. It is about inclusion and making sure that all of the girls and the women in schools and leaders are at the table. They need to be able to provide their experiences and to be able to have the opportunity to contribute to the solution. If there's an exclusion, then you're doing it in the exact same way that we've been doing it for years and years and years. And so we just need to make sure that we do have the opportunity to disrupt that. I think also the other is training and capacity. We can want the change, we can have the voice, and our voices can become actions, but we also need to be able to build the capacity of the instructors that are providing the path forward when our students get back into the building, because it won't be the same as it was before. And we need to be creative about how we are thinking that through. And I think lastly is just making sure that there is access to those women leaders that are leading this movement, that have the creativity, that have the knowledge and the know-how to be able to get us on the same page, to be able to allow us to think of things in a fairly, a largely different way than what we've been doing, because it is different. Virtual learning is very different than in-person learning. And when our students get back into the classrooms, we need to be ready for what happened in this past year, because the learning experiences, as the other panelists have said, it's very different across the board. It's similar in that there's mental trauma for a lot of our students. students, but just making sure that we have the leaders that are at the table, that are bringing creativity, that are listening, and then are actually listening to our girls and the experiences that they've experienced over this last year.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. So we have a lot of great questions coming in the Q&A box here, and I would love to, I think for the sake of time, I'll ask maybe like one person to respond to each one, just so that we can get to more questions. And a couple of them are directed at particular people, but a couple of them aren't. So we'll sort of see how we can do that way. But first, there's a good question there's a couple of questions actually related to sex education and reproduction and those sorts of issues, which of course affect girls and their education in very central ways. So one of the questions is, how might we approach sexual health and reproduction in ways that feels aligned with the values and advocates for the advancement of girls? Another related question is, a further challenge to poverty is family planning awareness. Sociocultural norms such as preferences for larger families can engender poverty. Dispelling myths and misconceptions about family planning is the first step to mitigating the poverty problem. So, and this is, obviously an issue I think that spans both local and global contexts too. So maybe I'd ask one of our more local representatives and one of the more global representatives to start. Maybe Croshelle, could you mention, I know that a moment ago you talked about, a young girl who can't go back to school because she has an infant. So can you tell us a little bit about how sex ed and reproduction factors into these issues?
Yeah, this question excited me because there was a part of my last response that I didn't get to talk about. So back to the activity that we offer where we're using, the women leaders in the community. We're also using youth ambassadors and peer educators. So we're training and empowering women to work with their peers to help them get back in school and stay in school. But another really key component of that has to do with family planning and water and sanitation. So those are two pillars that we also hang with the education component of that activity. And so what we're doing is we are trying to convince the community to delay marriage for these girls. And so that in turn will help somewhat with making sure that she's not going to have so many children over her lifetime if she doesn't start having children at 14 or 15. We're teaching girls about menstrual hygiene. We are building latrines and making them female friendly, because for a lot of young girls in the developing world, they will drop out of school the moment they start menstruation because it's either a shared bathroom with the boys or somehow it's just not equipped for her to clean herself properly. We also have worked with community groups to help them sew menstrual pads so that a girl just has the tools that she needs to leave the home during that time of the month. We're also trying to convince communities to combat school-based gender-based violence and to stop FGM, female genital mutilation. So all of these things, it's about messaging. It's about really helping communities understand why delayed marriage, delayed childbirth, cleanliness and protection of girls around their periods, and not making having your period such a taboo thing is really critical to a girl being able to continue her education through adolescence and hopefully through secondary school. So I'm glad for that question because it's really key for a lot of girls all over the world to be able to continue learning.
Thank you. And how about a more local perspective? Does either Karen or Angela want to talk about issues related to sex ed and reproduction issues with young girls?
Yeah, I can briefly talk about it, Angela. We could probably share the time a little bit. It's an open concept at our school. We have dialogue about this in our health class, and why we have open dialogue. We don't want our students to feel like there is a stigma associated with reproduction. If there is some health hygiene that a student is curious about, we're giving them the confidence to be able to ask those questions so that instead of keeping it in and not asking. And that is when stigmas are associated, or they're starting to feel ashamed about the question that they're asking. And so just being able to create a safe space for our students to be able to have the conversations. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we did small groups settings and invited women from the community to have conversations with our students. And it was wonderful, the questions that they were asking and the responses that they were able to get from the women that are in, health professions. It just really creates an open, safe environment when you put those types of concepts and topics on the table to discuss, and not just sweeping them under the rug and assuming that students would know the answers, or that they were taught that at home or in their previous year of schooling.
And how I would piggyback off of that is, I'm an out of school time program, so we have a little bit more flexibility. So one of the reasons that Girls for Change is big on sexuality with our girls and reproduction and all of that is because, again, another experience, just as a Black woman, the infant mortality rate is just insane. And a lot of it is due to lack of education, which has generationally passed on. So we have to do a lot of convincing to our parents, the adults in the home that are raising the girls, about the importance. So again, I mentioned that we partner with other organizations. So one is Planned Parenthood, who comes in, and my parents sign a release form to allow their daughters to really participate. And most of the time, the first time that they can even say, certain words of the body parts, because they name them all these other cute little names. And so they can, the girls are getting confidence with just what they can say and identifying their parts of their body. And then we want to see their population grow and be strong. And so I partner with a lot of doula programs in our city as well. I'm really fortunate to be next door to a birthing center right here in Richmond, Virginia. And so we are always open to making sure, especially women who look like them, are coming in sharing their own birthing experiences, that they are doulas. We have girls who have already signed up as early as 15 to become doulas in our community, to also make sure that they are helping with, increasing more healthy birth rates in our city. But also it allows them to respect their bodies and know what type of, birthing experience they want to have, if that's something they choose to do. So I think we have been able to take a different, creative approach because we're out of school time. And I'm really grateful for the amazing women in our city who have embraced our girls.
Another great example of the importance of the flexibility of broader community education beyond what just happens in schools, the real importance of that there. Great, thank you. This is a question related to inclusivity and intersectionality. This question says, can you share any of the work you may have done with girls that include girls with disabilities? It has been proven that girls with disabilities have the least access to quality education. Now with COVID, an opportunity presents itself to create a better situation for girls with disabilities to be at the table rather than being the last to be included or thought of. Melissa, do you have any insight on that, or not so much? That's fine. Anybody else want to talk about that, or something that their organization's looking at? Angela?
I can share a little bit. And I'll say agreed that you don't think about that all the time until you are faced with that. So I have many girls with different disabilities who have entered into Girls for a Change from small people, right? Where they may feel not included, who wanted to be a designer in fashion, because she never could see herself as a small person. And we were able to, travel with her to LA and New York with our girls that wanted to know how they can incorporate digital skills in creative spaces. I've had girls that have been blind in my program, and also deaf. And I actually teach sign language. So I was so excited when I saw a signer that I actually, like made sure that I text one of my girls who actually was inspired to become a signer because we had a deaf girl in the program. And she got a scholarship to Harvard. And her first day, they had freshman orientation and the signer was sick. And they said, is there anybody in the audience who can sign? And it was one of the girls in my program who was inspired because we had a deaf girl in our program who learned it. And so I love that story because when you don't think about it and it falls in your lap, it is your responsibility. It's your duty to figure out how to always stand in a gap that a girl may face. And so that's sometimes how things unfold. You may not always, again, it's access, it's experiences, it's exposure. And even you as a community leader may have those, hiccups in your program and you like, gotta figure it out because no girl will ever be pushed away in Girls for Change if we stand by our mission. And so that's how we've been able to serve them as they come. We will figure it out. Even our space that I'm sitting in now is, wheelchair accessible because we want to make sure all girls feel like they can participate fully and not feel pushed out. And fortunately, because girls usually just come with a genuine heart, they're going to figure out how to make sure that girl is included without me whispering that she has to be included. They are showing us that they too want to make sure that everyone is accepted in the program.
Thank you so much. For the sake of time, there's a few more questions we won't be able to get to, unfortunately. If the panelists want to try to multitask, which is difficult, I know, and answer any of the questions via the Q&A function, feel free to in the last few minutes that we have here. But the last question I'll close it on, which a few people raised in the Q&A, is what advice do all of you have for people that are interested in working in this field and are interested in working in the space of girls' education, either locally or globally? Are there any particular skills or experiences that students should focus on now to enable them to participate in this field? Who wants to take that one? Melissa?
Sure. And I'm so glad that Angela answered the last question around ability, because it's just very interesting with Girl Up. It's girl-led. There's no physical structure. And so we're having these conversations now in the virtual space, but it's new. They're new challenges to us with our structure. So Angela, I learned a little bit from you today. I appreciate it. So I guess, my advice for anyone looking to enter this field, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's international development, whether it's education, just the girls' space, is I think the most important thing that you can do at any age is to volunteer, is to get involved with a school, a community-based organization, a national organization, sort of find a way in to actually see how these organizations run, to interact with the girls, potentially, if that's your interest, who you want to serve. And you can get so much tangible, applicable experience by volunteering. I used to say get an internship, but there's only a few internships, each year. And there's a lot of privilege and access and things that come with internships, but anybody can volunteer typically. So I think that's just a really great entry point for everyone. You'll get to understand how these entities run, what are the types of skills that they need? What are the places that you could be additive? But if you actually get a chance to see that from the inside, I think it's a really good opportunity. I think the other piece that I would really just give advice to anybody who wants to go into an industry that is about serving other people is to get to know other people. Make sure that you are expanding outside of your small community. Make sure that you are meeting people who have a different experience than you, who bring a different identity, who bring a different lived experience into their day-to-day, so that you can actually be of service from a place of empathy, from a place of understanding and appreciation. I think, a lot of people enter the nonprofit space, and I probably did the same 20 years ago, of this idea of like, I want to help people, but I didn't really understand how people needed to be helped, or actually that wasn't the right way to think about it. They're perfectly capable. It's more, what is the sort of barriers and what are the things that they're having to overcome. And so I think the more that you learn what other people's experience actually are, that you can learn how to ask questions, you can learn how to learn, the better that you will do in this industry. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice, is to volunteer and to get to know other people that are different than you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And I think that they probably correspond with what the other panelists would say. And with that, we are going to wrap up. So I want to thank so much all of our different panelists, Karen Venable-Croft, Melissa Kilby, Angela Patton, and Croshelle Harris-Hussein. All of you, I really appreciate your time and thought that you put into this panel and sharing so many important stories on both the local level and the global level and the micro and macro dimensions of this. So I also want to thank again the School of International Service at American University and the School of Education International Training and Education Program for sponsoring this event. And I know that this will be posted on SIS's YouTube channel. So if one of your friends is going to be really jealous that they missed out on today's conversation, they'll be able to watch it later on YouTube. And we'll be sending out the link for that. And stay tuned as well for other SIS global to local events where we try to bring all these different perspectives in on these important issues. So thanks again for coming and have a wonderful week.